Is the Montreal Canadiens front office about to make a calculated chess move that could reshape their entire season? Or are they about to walk into a financial trap that looks tempting on the surface, but becomes a nightmare in the salary cap ledger? The Alexandre Texier situation represents one of the most intriguing strategic decisions Kent Hughes has faced all year, and it's a decision that perfectly encapsulates the tension between immediate need and long-term prudence that defines this rebuild. Let's set the stage. Alexandre Texier, the St. Louis Blues forward, has found himself in professional limbo. The 24-year-old, who was once considered a promising prospect in the Columbus Blue Jackets organization, is now caught in a situation where his current team has essentially signaled that his services are no longer required. This isn't just a healthy scratch or a temporary benching. This is organizational rejection playing out in real time. The Blues placed Texier on waivers, making him available to every team in the NHL. For a franchise like Montreal, desperately searching for forward depth due to an injury crisis that's decimated their lineup, this presents an intriguing opportunity wrapped in a complex decision tree. Here's where it gets interesting. The Canadiens are presented with two distinct options, each carrying different implications for their salary cap, their roster flexibility, and their long-term strategic vision. Option 1. Attempt a waiver claim for Texier and immediately add a $2.1 million cap hit to their books. This is the straightforward approach. Claim the player, integrate him into the lineup, and hope he provides the depth scoring and forward support the team desperately needs right now. Option 2. Exhibit patience. Wait to see if the situation deteriorates further. If Texier's relationship with St. Louis continues to sour, if the Blues decide that moving on is in everyone's best interest, at that point, the Canadiens could potentially negotiate a mutually agreed contract termination, which would allow them to sign Texier to a brand new deal with a much more reasonable annual average value. Think about that distinction for a moment. It's the difference between paying full price for a discounted product and waiting for the clearance sale. The $2.1 million cap hit is significant. For a team like Montreal, operating with limited cap flexibility and trying to maintain space for potential mid-season acquisitions, that's not an insignificant number. It's the kind of commitment that affects your ability to maneuver later in the season. It's the kind of number that, if Texier doesn't produce or doesn't fit, becomes a regrettable anchor on your salary structure. But here's what makes the situation genuinely fascinating from a strategic standpoint. We've seen this movie before. David Kampf, the Chicago Blackhawks center, found himself in a similar situation not long ago. Kampf was a player whose contract had become a burden for his original organization. The Blackhawks, facing cap constraints and roster decisions, essentially moved on from him. But here's the crucial part. When Kampf's contract was terminated by mutual agreement, he became available as a free agent at a fraction of his original cap hit. This is the template the Canadiens might be considering with Texier. Why pay $2.1 million for a player on waivers when you might be able to sign that same player for substantially less money once his current contract is terminated? It's not just about the immediate cap savings. It's about maintaining flexibility. It's about having options. The question becomes, is Texier's immediate availability worth the premium price, or is he worth waiting for at a discount? Before we can properly evaluate this decision, we need to understand who Alexandre Texier actually is as a player. He's a young forward with legitimate NHL experience and a skill set that, on paper, should translate to consistent production. He's got speed, he's got hockey sense, and he's shown flashes of the kind of offensive ability that made him an interesting prospect in Columbus. But here's the complication. Flashes aren't consistency. Potential isn't production. Texier has struggled to establish himself as a reliable, dependable contributor at the NHL level. He's had stretches where he looks like a player who could develop into something special, followed by stretches where he disappears from games entirely. This inconsistency is precisely why St. Louis has decided to move on. For the Canadiens, Texier represents a specific type of need. They're not looking for a franchise cornerstone. They're not expecting him to be a top six forward who transforms their lineup. What they need is depth. They need bodies who can play meaningful minutes, who can contribute in a supporting role, and who won't completely collapse the team structure if they're in the lineup. Texier could fill that role. He's got enough skill, that he won't be a complete liability. He's got enough experience that he won't require extensive development time. He's the kind of player who can step in and provide competent, if not spectacular, contributions. The question is whether that level of contribution justifies a financial commitment. And that's where the strategic calculus becomes genuinely difficult. The Montreal Canadiens injury situation has created a sense of urgency that's difficult to overstate when you're missing significant contributors up front. When your lineup is being held together with tape and prayers, the temptation to grab any available help becomes almost overwhelming. It's the hockey equivalent of being thirsty in the desert. You drink whatever water is available, even if it's not the cleanest option. The injuries have forced Kent Hughes into a position where he's actively searching for solutions. The waiver wire, which is typically a secondary source of roster depth, has become a primary hunting ground. Every player who hits waivers is being evaluated through the lens of immediate need. But here's what separates competent general management from reactive, emotional decision-making: the ability to distinguish between addressing immediate problems and creating long-term solutions. Yes, the Canadiens need help right now. Yes, the injuries have created a genuine crisis. But does that crisis justify paying a premium price for a player who might be available at a substantial discount in a few weeks? This is where patience becomes a strategic asset rather than a liability. If Hughes can weather the injury storm of the current roster, if the team can stay competitive despite the absences, then waiting for a better financial opportunity with Texier makes genuine sense. The Canadiens aren't in a position where they need to make a desperation move. They're in a position where they can afford to be strategic. The broader NHL context matters here too. How many other teams are going to be interested in claiming Texier off waivers? If Montreal passes and another team claims him, is that actually a loss for Canadiens, or is it a bullet dodged? The reality is that Texier's availability on waivers suggests that most teams in the league have already evaluated him and decided he's not worth a cap hit. If that's the case, then Montreal passing on him isn't necessarily leaving value on the table. It's simply agreeing with the rest of the league's assessment. Conversely, if multiple teams are interested in claiming Texier, then Montreal needs to ask themselves, are we willing to get into a bidding war for a player who's been rejected by his current organization? Or are we comfortable letting someone else take on that financial commitment? The competitive landscape suggests that Texier is available precisely because he's not a transformative player. He's a depth option, and depth options, by definition, should be available at reasonable prices. If you're paying a premium for depth, you're making a mistake. Let's explore what a mutually agreed contract termination with Texier might actually look like. If St. Louis and Texier reach an agreement to part ways, the player becomes a free agent. At that point, he's no longer bound by his $2.1 million contract. He's available to negotiate a new deal with any team willing to sign him. The Canadiens could potentially sign Texier to a contract worth significantly less than $2.1 million, perhaps $1.2 million, perhaps $1.5 million. That's a meaningful difference in cap flexibility. That's the difference between being able to make another move later in the season and being locked into your current structure. Moreover, a new contract negotiated after a termination would likely include terms more favorable to Montreal. The player, having just been rejected by one organization, would be motivated to prove his worth. The Canadiens would have leverage in negotiations that they don't currently have. This is a scenario that makes strategic sense for a team in Montreal's position. It requires patience. It requires confidence that the current roster can survive the injury crisis. But it also positions the Canadiens to make smarter financial decisions down the road. So, what should Kent Hughes actually do? The answer depends on several factors that only the Canadiens front office can properly evaluate. First, how severe is the injury situation? If key players are expected back within days, then waiting makes sense. If the injuries are long-term, then the urgency increases. Second, how confident is Hughes in the current roster's ability to compete? If he believes the team can stay competitive despite the absences, then patience is justified. If he thinks the team will collapse without reinforcements, then claiming Texier becomes more defensible. Third, what's the probability that Texier's contract gets terminated? If there's genuine reason to believe St. Louis and Texier will reach an agreement to part ways, then waiting is the smart play. If it seems unlikely, then claiming him now might be the only way to acquire him. Fourth, what other options are available? Are there other players who might hit waivers in the coming weeks? Are there trade opportunities that might emerge? The Texier decision doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a broader strategy. What this situation really illustrates is the complexity of modern NHL management. It's not enough to simply identify a need and fill it. You have to consider cap implications, contract structures, long-term flexibility, and strategic positioning. You have to balance immediate needs against future opportunities. The Canadiens are a team in transition. They're rebuilding. They're developing young players, like Lane Hutson. They're trying to create a sustainable competitive structure. In that context, every financial decision matters. Every cap dollar committed is a cap dollar not available for something else. Texier might be a useful depth player. He might provide the kind of support the Canadiens need right now. But is he worth $2.1 million? Is he worth sacrificing flexibility? Is he worth potentially missing out on a better opportunity later? These are the questions that define competent general management. These are the decisions that separate organizations that build sustainable winners from organizations that perpetually struggle. The Texier situation is a microcosm of everything the Canadiens face this season. It's about balancing urgency with prudence. It's about distinguishing between addressing immediate problems and making smart long-term decisions. It's about having the discipline to wait for better opportunities, even when the pressure to act is overwhelming. Kent Hughes has shown throughout his tenure that he's willing to be patient. He's willing to make calculated decisions rather than reactive ones. The Texier situation will be another test of that philosophy. So here's my question for you. If you were in Kent Hughes' position, would you claim Texier off waivers, or would you wait and hope for a mutual termination scenario? What's your tolerance for risk versus your desire for immediate solutions? Drop your thoughts in the comment below, and smash that like button if you appreciate the strategic breakdown of how modern NHL management actually works. Thanks for watching.